Hello. Can you hear me now? Hello, guys. Okay, that's good. Sorry, it was I think it was a slight glitch there. So, let's get started. Okay. So, today we'll be talking about identity and access management, and I'd mentioned in the last class when we were talking about implementing zero trust. I'd said identity and access management, it was one of the most critical components of, and not just even any cloud environment, any IT ecosystem. Uh, Reason being that in an environment where you have resources and you need users to be able to access resources, then you need to begin to define who is who within your environment and who is able to do what in that same environment and what are they able to access. Now, when it comes to few seconds, okay. So when it comes to identity and access management, typically what you are dealing with is access and permission, or probably authentication and authorization, as it's been called in some other context. So, which means you are talking about who is who in the first instance. How do I validate that they are who they claim they are? And also, how do I ensure that they are only restricted to access what I want them to be able to access? So that is the whole idea, basic idea behind identity and access management. And now taking that forward, you want to be able to ensure that those policies, configuration restrictions are enforced. So if I say I need you to be able to authenticate to access these resources, then I want to be sure that that is what is happening. You are not able to go beyond that scope so that you don't begin to undermine my CIA confidentiality, integrity, or probably uh, accessibility as I had designed them. So now we'll be looking at Azure Active Directory. We'll also look at Active Directory domain services. We'll look at hybrid identity, Azure AD object. We'll look at Azure AD roles. We'll also talk about authentication methods. So at the end of this session, we should be able to compare and contrast Azure AD versus the on-premise services, and also relate with what are those features available for each of those deployment options. Then we'll configure deploy users, administrative units, and use that also to define access within an environment that is within our tenant. We'll review what authentication methods are available, how we can decide what authentication methods users should use. Now, putting this into context, you remember in the last session we had said that there are certain principles that you have to abide by when implementing zero trust, and one of it is you having a strong authentication system in place. And you would have to put strong authentication in context to decide what you want to achieve. And it is not just authentication alone. You would also want to ensure that access to resources are defined as you would typically need them. So Azure Active Directory is a cloud-based identity and management service. Cloud-based being that it's a software as a service solution. So which means although it's called Active Directory, you don't mix it up with the legacy or conventional Active Directory that you have. In the sense that the conventional Active Directory, which is the on-premise Active Directory, you have to be responsible for spinning up your servers, installing your Windows Server operating system, configuring the Azure Active Directory rules, setting up your object and the likes, and also patching as required. But in this case, you are consuming this service off the cloud as a cloud-based service. So, which means you care less about what happens in the back end. That is, how are those objects managed, on what platforms it runs, how is it patched, and the likes. That is not your responsibility. It's the responsibility of the cloud service provider. So all you do is provision your objects, your users, define your access, your authentication method, and you are good to go. However, it's still very much possible for you to integrate this with your on-premise or legacy Active Directory. This is in situations where you want to
Sorry, seem to be having a lot of glitch this morning. So I've lost my camera. Okay. Few seconds, please. I don't have no idea why this is happening. Settings. Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Okay, so I think we are fine. Uh, Apologies. Uh, I won't be using my video because it appears there's a glitch somewhere. Let me see. Okay, so let's proceed. So, like I said, like I was saying, this is a cloud-based solution, and you're not responsible for managing the underlying infrastructure. That is purely responsibility of the cloud service provider. So let's move on to look at the Azure AD editions. So Azure AD comes in different editions, which defines what are the features that are available for you to use within the platform. So first you have the Azure Active Directory free, which provides basic user and group management capability, and as well as single sign-on, both for Microsoft 365 and several other software as a service apps that you may want to integrate with this. You wouldn't need to pay to use this particular service, and this is what you get when you sign up for Azure Active Directory or probably any other Azure services or Microsoft cloud-based services. The next is the Azure Active Directory Microsoft 365 apps, which comes with Microsoft 365, which is a Microsoft-based SaaS application for collaboration and the likes. And this comes with a little bit more additional feature than you get with the free, like you have identity and access management, you have branding, you have MFA group management, and password self service reset for your cloud users. Now, if you go to the Active Directory Premium P1, you get additional features like dynamic groups, self-service group management, identity management, cloud write back, because this gives you hybrid capability, and you're able to set up self-service password reset both for your cloud users as well as your on-premise users. Then for the Premium P2, you'd have additional features like identity protection, conditional access, privilege identity management, and the likes. So when you sign up for free Azure Active Directory, for Active Directory by default, you get the free edition, and you can always upgrade to get the premium. When you sign up for Microsoft 365 services, you get the Azure Active Directory, Microsoft 365 apps, and you could as well upgrade any of that to get the premium P1 or probably premium P2 capability. Now, looking at Azure Active Directory with the Active Directory domain services, which is the traditional Active Directory that a large number of us would know or probably would have worked with, that is an on-prem infrastructure which you typically manage yourself. And this is protocol based. Is a network. It runs on a network protocol, which is the Kerberos, and uses network the NTLM authentication protocol, unlike the cloud-based identity management that makes use of OAuth authentication, OpenID, which are cloud-based services that are consumed using REST APIs and the likes. Then within your when it comes to structure, you typically just have a tenant within Azure AD, but for your on-premise, you're talking about having your domains, having your trust, having your organization unit before you even talk about the object. Then use cases, you'd use your Azure Active Directory for cloud-based services, entirely cloud-based services, while you'd use your on-premise for network-based services, for authentication authorization on your printers, on your applications, on your file services, and the likes. Then you now have a platform as a service based Azure Active Directory, which is called the Azure AD Domain Services. This is platform as service, and when I say platform as service, it means that Microsoft is responsible for managing the underlying infrastructure, the OS, the application, and what you are doing at that particular level is having an Azure Active Directory platform, which is similar to what you have on your on-premise. However, you are not responsible for managing the server. You are not responsible for managing the operating system. You are not responsible for even managing the roles. It has been set up and it's managed by Active Directory. All you do is go and consume the Active Directory domain services of that platform. So this is also it's also possible for you to integrate this with Azure AD. You would also you use your corporate credentials just like you have on your on-premise. This also uses NTLM and cables authentication, and you enjoy high availability because the availability of the infrastructure or the service or the platform is responsibility of Microsoft. Then in this case, you're also able to do your normal group policy, organization units, create your users, provide your network printers with this information using the LDAP details and the likes. So this is a managed Active Directory, unlike the one you would typically have on your on-premise, which is typically your responsibility. So that is another flavor of Active Directory that you have in the cloud. But however, you could as well go to the cloud, which is Azure, and spin up a VM and install your own Windows Server operating system and your Active Directory domain services role. That would fall under the classification of you having an infrastructure as a service where you run your Active Directory. That is also possible. So it's similar to what you have to on-premise, except for the fact that you don't manage the physical infrastructure on which your server runs. Now let's go to managing Active Directory objects. Uh, the objects you have within Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, you'd have users, you have groups, you'd have administrative units, unlike organization units that you'd have within your on-premise. And uh, you can use this account for authentication and authorization. That means you use that to validate who is logging into your environment or probably who is accessing resources, and you would also use that to define what level of permission you would have. There are different types of users. You could have the Azure AD users, you could have guest users, you could also have situation where you have business to consumer or probably business to business unit. This is where you'll be talking about integrating your authentication platform with that of other providers so that you could have people consuming services from other end be able to use their credential to access your own environment, or probably you being able to create credentials or probably access configurations for them within your own platform. So you'd have when it comes to groups, we are familiar with this in the Azure administration session. When it comes to groups, you have different types of groups. You have security groups, you have Microsoft 365 groups. Yeah, when it comes to groups, you'd have these types. But in another instance, you may begin to think about distribution groups, which typically are not used for defining permissions, but you always talk about that when you are talking about Exchange or probably Microsoft 365 when you have email services. And membership of a group can either be based on assignment. That means I create a group, I define who would be a member of that group, and it could also be dynamic. Dynamic means that I would have defined the attributes of users or probably objects that can typically be a member of each of these groups. And the system automatically adds them to that group and takes them off as the case may be. So I could say I define the location, I could define naming attributes or probably naming convention to be a membership or any of the characteristics of the object. So when the schedule for uh, these dynamic groups updates runs, it scans the environment for objects with this type of attributes and it automatically adds them. And when this object actually changes, the group membership is also refreshed to take them off. So you could have dynamic groups for users, you could also have dynamic groups for devices as well. And one other component of identity that you have within Azure is managed identity. Now, when it comes to accessing resources, access to resources are not restricted to humans alone. That means your users. So, which means you could have other type of subjects that would need access to your environment that are not typically users. Maybe your applications, maybe your services. Within the traditional environment, you'd call some of these services. And when a service needs to access certain resources at the same level as a normal user, you call them service accounts. So you create service accounts for your applications or probably your services, which these services would use to authenticate, and they would use that to access that resource based on whatever permission you have defined. Within the cloud or Azure cloud environment, they are called managed identity. And managed identity are used in situations where you have resources, when you have applications or private services that need to access resources within your Azure environment, just like a typical user would do. And they can either be system assigned or private user assigned. System assigned would mean that you create this uh, managed identity as a system assigned managed identity, and the permission of or probably access or credential will be managed by the system. The refresh of this access or private credential will be managed by the system, and also what resources they can access would also be managed by the system. However, when it comes to user assigned, you have the flexibility of defining what service will be using it, what resources they will be accessing, what is the permission, and also you're able to use this for several services. So when you look at system managed, the life cycle of this is managed by Azure. Basically, when the parent resource is deleted, the managed identity is also deleted as well. And for this, you create it as part of the resource when you are creating it. Meanwhile, for user assigned, you create them yourself. You decide when you want to use them. You decide when you want to delete them. You can use them across different services to access different resources. Meanwhile, for your system assigned, they can only be used for the resource for which they have been created. So look at some of the common use cases here. You have workloads contained within Azure resources. Workload needing independent identity, then you use system assigned. For workloads that run on multiple resources that needs pre-authorization or probably any other custom configuration, then you would always use a user assigned. So let's quickly look at some of these within our Azure platform. So let me change my screen and go to my Azure. Let's see, it's screen right, and I present my browser. Okay. Now this is my Azure tenant. And here I can see as Active Directory, which I could also search for here. Here I have Azure Active Directory, and this is the free. You can see the license type is Azure AD free, because this is what comes by default when I signed up for my Azure subscription. Although I'm able to upgrade this into a premium if I need any of the premium features, then I can always upgrade this to a premium Azure Active Directory. So in here, just looking at the navigation, when you go to Azure Active Directory, on your left-hand side, you see users, you see groups, you see external identities, role administrators, roles administrator, administrative units, and the likes. So if I come to users in here, if I've got existing users, I can see them, and I can create new users. So I can create new user, or probably I can invite external users, which in this case you call a guest user. So you use guest users when you need to grant access to resources or probably applications within your environment for to an external party who is not part of your organization. So you want the person to still be able to authenticate and also access that resource using any particular identity or probably any particular parameter. In this case, is always email. So if I come here to say I need to create a guest user, hereafter the user must always have an email address, the email address of the user you like to invite. So this is what the user would use to authenticate, and the user would have get an email to say you've been invited, complete the enrollment process, and you'd have access. So would try to create a normal user, which I believe is not rocket science. So here I want to create a user. This is my custom domain name, which Azure Active Directory would assign when you sign up. And this is this is my default domain name and my custom domain name. So I can specify which of the domains this which of the domain names this should have. So I'll call this test user 01 username. Okay, this is the username. So test, there'll be no space 01. I'll call this test user. I'll call this Azure uh, last name user. So I can create a password here. I'll probably leave the option of auto-generated password, and you can see this is the automatic password that this is creating. Would come back to groups and group memberships. Do I want the user to sign in, or probably I want to block sign in? Which location is the user currently? And this would help when it comes to protection, when it comes to identity protection, which is part of what we'll be covering in the next session. Then you can fill this up as required. So I'll go ahead to create this user. And when I come in here to users, I should find that user in here. Few seconds. So I have the test user in here. Now, when it comes to inviting guests or probably creating guest users, I'll need to provide the email address of the users. So let me say it. This could be any email address, gmail.com, and there it goes mouse. If I say send an invite, the user gets this message as part of a notification. If I say please enroll and access this service. So here I could define several other properties like names, last name, location, fax number. These are additional information. Then also if they are group memberships or probably role that I want to assign. Now, mind you, from here, you could see that even a guest user could be a member of a group, and you could also assign a guest user a role, would still come back a role, uh, which are responsibilities, administrative responsibilities that you can assign to a user, uh, that gives them that right to be able to exercise that responsibility, like admin administrator, user administrator, billing administrator. You could as well assign these roles to a standard user, just like you can to a guest user. So I would say review this, and if I go ahead to invite this user, now the user would get a notification. Uh, Meanwhile, in here also, I would have the guest user created. I should have that in the next few seconds. Okay, this is still coming up. Okay, so I have the Rego Miles here, and this is showing up here as a guest user. And how was this created? I sent an invitation. So once the user accepts that invitation, then this becomes an account the user could use to access resources. And you can see the way the good to note the way the user principal name for this user is created. The Each of the objects still has the default Microsoft domain, which is the on Microsoft domain, but this is mapped with their email and this extension to show that this is an external user, and that is what is used in creating the identity for that particular guest user. Then when it comes to groups, I can come and create and manage groups from here. Uh, so here I can add, so here, okay, sorry, I'd have to go back in here, Azure Active Directory. So here I have groups. So I can come here to say I want to create a group where I'm able to define what type of group do I want, a security group or a Microsoft 365 group. Now, something to note about Microsoft 365 group is that when this is used together with your M365 subscription, the groups is automatically created with several additional feature, probably services like a shared mailbox, a Microsoft Teams. Then also you also have some element of SharePoint library attached to that, and primarily you'd use this to grant access to external people to be able to collaborate with your own people within the environment on projects where you have that common repository, that common platform, or perhaps that common group where they share those information and the likes. So that is for Microsoft 365 group. I'll call this group one. Group one. I would go and say I want the members to be Dorigo's Mouse as well as Olajide. Then I'll go ahead to say select, and I would create this. So while that is creating, let's go ahead and create a security group. And here I'm unable. So this is where you define your membership type, if it's going to be dynamic or if it's going to be assigned. As part of my free Azure AD subscription, I'm only able to create an assigned group. However, if I have the M365 Azure AD for M365, or I have that of the Premium 1 or the Premium 2, I would be able to create dynamic users for my security group. But the same process applies. You give it a name. Here, you just need to provide the membership type. Then you specify the owner, and you go ahead to create. So that is for group membership. If you have questions, you can always drop them in the chat. I would see them and attend to them. So now let's go back to the slide. Okay. Before we go back to the slide, let's see how we create managed identity. So I'll go back to my lab. Go back to my lab. Let's talk about managed identity. So I'd said you use managed identity to grant access to services or applications within your tenant. So if I come here to say managed, I would see managed identity. So here it says I should go ahead and create a managed identity. So if I come here to say create, so I would have to specify what resource group. I would specify this, my region. So I would call this managed ID 01. I would go next. I would go next and I would say create. Now, this that I've done here is a user assigned or probably user created managed identity. So we'll see how this works. No, now I've created this managed identity, and let's see that I need. This is coming up. I need this managed identity to be able to access certain resources. Let me see what resources I have here. Do I have a VM here? Yeah, I do. So let's assume that I have an application, let's say an orchestration application or a third party VM management application that would need full access to my VM and be able to manage my VM or my VM on my behalf, which means that that particular application would need the same level of access that a physical VM administrator would typically have within this environment. So, since that application is not human, the application would be authenticating using the managed ID I had created, and I can come here to grant access to this VM attached to that. So let me say low role administrator in here. Come up. So I want to say VM contributor. Uh, let's say virtual machine, virtual. Okay, so VM virtual machine contributor. I want to grant virtual machine contributor role. This lets you manage virtual machine but not access them and not the network or the storage account uh, to that. So here I can say I want to grant users group service principal, or I want to create a managed identity or probably assign this to a managed identity. Let's come in here. So I want my user assigned managed identity. So you can see I have managed ID 01, which was the managed identity had created. And also from here, you could see it says all system assigned. Do you have a system assigned managed identity? It's like I have one from a resource I created earlier, but here I'm using my system assigned managed identity. I would go in here and I would say select. So this managed identity will now have this role or probably access to that particular VM. So if I have any application or any service uh, that is authenticating using that managed identity, that service will be able to perform the role of a virtual machine contributor on this virtual machine. So that's about managed identity. So let's go back to the slide. Now, let's go ahead and talk about administrative units within Azure. Okay, not this. I wanted to slide me. Okay, so administrative units are elements of delegation within your Azure AD environment. So, what do I mean? You have roles within Azure, which are built-in roles that define certain level of permissions, and some of them of those roles already have got scope. So, which means you could exercise whoever holds that particular role could exercise control or that access or probably permission over the whole Azure AD tenant. So, but you have cases where, especially when you have a very large environment or probably segmented environment, you'd want to have some levels of administration. You have level one, level two, level three, where each of these level of administrators have got a scope of what they can do. So for you to be able to achieve that, you have to create administrative units. So I could have an enterprise environment where I have a local office in the US, I have another local office in Nepal, I have another local office in India. So I want local administrators in each of these regions only to be able to manage their users and resources within that they consume or probably within that particular region. So for you to achieve that, or probably could do this department wise, where I have primary help desk or probably first contact administrators within each department, and that administrator is responsible for managing users, objects, or probably resources for their department. So the administrative unit is more or less like a container. You could liken it to organization unit that you have within the traditional Azure environment. In this case, the administrative unit can take users and groups as members. So, which means whatever level of permission or probably whatever level of access or administrative responsibility will be exercised over those users and the groups. And you could use it to delegate AD access to resources or probably even to specific individuals. This can be done using PowerShell from the portal, from the M365 Admin Center if you have an M365 subscription. And for you to be able to do this, you can create administrative units, define members of administrative units, even with the Azure AD free subscription. However, for you to be able to use it to delegate access or administrative responsibilities, you need either a P1 or a P2 a P1 or a P2 subscription. So let's take for instance, I have an enterprise environment, say Contoso, and I have different regions in North Amsterdam, US East, Europe, Germany, Asia, India. I would typically have a global admin, which has that oversight and responsibility over the whole tenant. But in each of these region, I want someone else to be able to manage users, to be able to manage devices, applications, to be able to manage policies at that particular level, which would apply only to their own users. Then I need to begin to create administrative unit and define the permissions as required. Now, when it comes to granting permission, you have what referred to as built-in roles, just like you have them within your traditional Azure, within your traditional Active Directory environment. You also have them within Azure, which are roles which access and permissions have been defined just for them to be able to carry out specific responsibility. For instance, you have the global administrator whose responsibility is to administer the whole tenant. You have security administrator. You have billing administrator who would probably be responsible for managing purchases, subscriptions, support tickets. You have global reader, which basically is just for reviewing. Users in this role can read settings, and these are some of the roles you want to uh, 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 assigned to auditors within your environment or probably reviewers typically. So they are built in. Their level of permission responsibilities have been predefined, and you can use them as is if they meet your delegation scope or probably your they align with your delegation strategy within your environment. So all you need to do is just identify the role and make the users members of that particular role. But you have to put into consideration the concept of least privilege. So, meaning that if some of this role would come with so much permission beyond what you want the role holder to have, in alignment with your delegation and access strategy, then it is not advisable you use the built-in rules, because this would mean that you are giving the user more rights and permission than they need to carry their role. Then you need to begin to look at creating granular rules, which we'll talk about in the next session when we can talk about role-based access control. But just have it in mind that there are built-in rules, their scope, responsibility has been predefined, and you could use them as is if they meet your strategy, or if they align with your strategy. Now, in addition to defining roles or probably permissions which administrative user within your environment would hold, uh, one key part of identity and access management is authentication. And what authentication means is that you would want your users to prove that they are who they are. So now, primarily looking at it at this way, I have a user whose name is user A. That user told me that is user A. That's the identity. Then someone comes knocking at my door and says, when I say who is that, you say is user A. He has just identified himself, that user A. Yeah, I know user A. But how do I know that this user A is the one I know, or probably the one I'm expecting? So I need something else for that user to be able to prove that they are who they are. And that is where authentication comes in. And most of us will be familiar with the most popular and the most common means of authentication, which is providing a password. So when you have the concept of using username and password, your username is your identity. What you use to validate or probably to prove your identity is the password, because the password it is expected that you alone know that password, or that although everybody could know your identity, know you by your name, your username, almost everybody could know your username, but when it comes to your identity, should be known by you alone, and should by you alone, and also whoever is going to validate that. So that when you come knocking at the door and I say, why you say your name is user one, okay, what is your password or probably your secret code? You tell me, then I should have a way to verify that yes, this is the secret code, because we would have mutually agreed to say yes, this is secret code, which you would present. So that is authentication and authentication method. But I only use that as an instance, being the most common or probably the most popular method of authentication. You have several other methods of authentication, and mind you, password-based authentication over time has proven to be weak and gets weaker almost every day. Yeah, you talk about complex password, but with advancement in technology, complex passwords get compromised. All you just need is a higher computing power that can process more tasks per second, and within a short period of time, you could crack even the longest password, probably most complex password you can imagine. So it is now required, perhaps it's now necessary that we need to think beyond the uh, uh, the traditional means of authentication, which is using username and password, to begin to think of what are the other secure method of authenticating or probably validating users within your environment. So now, these are the list of authentication methods supported within Azure environment. You have Windows Hello for Business. They all have their use cases. For instance, you have Windows Hello for Business, which is a method of authentication for devices, primarily Windows devices. It is highly secured. You have the Microsoft Authenticator, which is an app. It is also highly secured. You have the Microsoft Authenticator Lite, which is also using some form of application on your phone also for authentication. You have the FIDO, which is a USB key, which is also strong. You could also use it for devices. You use FIDO for devices, you Windows Hello for devices. Your Microsoft Authentication and also Authenticator Lite can be used for applications on mobile devices, web-based applications. You could also use certificate-based authentication, OAuth keys or OAuth hardware tokens, SMS, voice, and password. You can see that the least secured on this list is username and password. Although it is highly available because it is left for you to remember your username and your password, and likewise, it is also usable. It is also very easy for you to use. So now let's see within your Azure environment, you have a list of these authentication options which you'd have to enable to make them available for your users to use. Let's see how that works in the lab. So, a few seconds, I would be switching my screen. So, just a few seconds. Okay. So let's go on to talk about. So now, let's go to. So now, from this my Azure tenant, if I go to say authentication method, Azure AD authentication method. So here, I can see the different authentication methods, the FIDO security key, which is a USB based or hardware based security authentication method. It's always in form of USB, and one of the use cases in where you have shared devices, that you're unable to use Windows Hello. All the user needs to do is come with their FIDO key, slot it into the USB, and they get authenticated. Then you have the Microsoft Authenticator app, the SMS, temporary password, software-based OAuth tokens, voice call, email OTP, or perhaps certificate based. So you can see the only option I have here enabled is the email OTP. So which means users won't be able to use any other methods that I don't have here. But for me to make it available, all I need to do is to come here to say enable and specify which of my users are able to use this authentication method. So here I can have all users and becomes available. We'll see where you're able to define that. I could enable Microsoft Authenticator app as well. It's just a switch and I have them enabled. So when I have them enabled, I can also define them for each of my users to say for these users, these are the authentication methods that you can use. So I'll come here, I'll come into users here. So let's say I have the test user we created earlier. If I come here to authentication methods, so here currently I don't have any method defined. So I can come here to say add method. Here I have choose. So I have email. I can specify the email address here. Say add. I can come here again and I'll add a phone number. This is my primary phone number. So when I now sign up for the authenticator method, I should invalid phone number. Okay, I'll put just a plus sign here. Uh, so I would say add. So when I sign up, phone number interprets the plus sign. Okay, let me use a valid phone number. 34 806 31461. Unable to add phone number. The phone number is formatted improperly. This is 1 2 3 4 4. That is 8 9 10. The first one should be 11. Okay, so I have the phone number here as well. So now you would come back to talk about multi-factor authentication much later when we talk about identity protection. So that is for authentication method. Now we talked about administrative unit earlier also. So we'll come here to say administrative unit. So presently I have two administrative units here, but let's say I have a office in London. So I'll create an administrative unit here in London. Uh, I'll go next. Assign roles. Mm, let's say help desk to this guy. This guy should be able to perform the function of an help desk over the users that are in London. I'll go next. I doubt I'll be able to create this because I'll need a premium account. Yeah, so this failed because I'll need a premium account, a premium Azure aid to do that. So the assignment of role failed, but the creation of administrative unit was successful. So if I go to the administrative unit, I can add members. So if I know that these two users are in London, then I can add them to that administrative unit. So both of them are in London. And so when I eventually upgrade probably sign up for any of the premium Azure AD subscription, and I want one of the users to serve as the user administrator who is responsible for resetting password, defining group members, and the likes, then I can come here to assign that. So you could see to assign roles and resource scope, you need Azure AD Premium 1 or 2. I can just start that for free or probably run a trial for that. So that is for authentication methods and administrative unit. So one more thing I would like us to also look at for authentication method is what referred to as authentication strength. So if I come to authentication method in here, I come back here, authentication method. So even though it's a new feature, now the idea behind authentication strength is that when you leave your users at liberty to decide what form of authentication they want to access any type of resource, then you still follow the risk of any of the authentication risks or probably exposures. So because users don't like completing authentication token on their phones, either from the app or probably for calls or probably for SMS, you'd see users telling you that, no, I just want my password. I don't want any other form of authenticator. I don't want MFA. I don't want to combine my means of authentication with any other thing, or probably I've misplaced my phone, or you didn't buy my phone for me, so I won't be using my phone to authenticate. Or in some instances, they will say, I find this too rigorous. Why do I have to do this just to access this or that? So if you leave them at liberty to define what form of authentication they use to access your resources, then that would even defeat the purpose of you having advanced or perhaps secured authentication system within your environment, because users wouldn't use it. So what authentication strength does is you would define uh, based on the strength of each of the authentication method that is allowable within Azure environment, you define which of those combinations users should use in different scenarios. So if you have critical assets that are meant to be protected with the best or probably most secure authentication method within your environment, then you want to identify the most secure combinations as a method of authentication. For instance, here I have passwordless MFA, phishing resistant MFA that has been created for me by default. You can see they are built in, but I can also create mine. And it says authentication strength determine the combination of authentication method that can be used. So I'll call this, let's say, for uh, authentication for admins. For my admins, because they'll be accessing critical resources, I want to say on their PC, they should be signing in using Windows Hello for Business. And this Windows Hello for Business should be combined with multi-factor authentication. And if I'm doing, or better still, if I'm doing multi-factor authentication, it has to be just multi-factor authentication alone, or probably a combination of password and multi-factor authentication using a push, or I can say password plus software tokens. So I can define different authentication methods. The first set are the most secured, and that's why they are called phishing resistant MFA. These are the most secured form of authentication you could have, then followed by passwordless authentication, where you are using just authenticator alone to complete your authentication, then followed by multi-factor authentication, where you are combining several methods of authentication, followed by single factor authentication. That means you can sign in with just password alone, you are fine. So you can define any of these for your method of authentication. So I'll go ahead to select these two. I'll go, and it says during signing, users will require to authenticate using one of the following. Either they use multi-factor authentication, phone signing, which is passwordless authentication, or you use Windows Hello for Business. So the way this works is that in situation where Windows Hello for Business is not supported as method of authentication for whatever they are trying to access, then it falls back to using passwordless authentication. Then I can now go ahead to say, uh, let me come here, select this, not configured. I don't have a policy yet. Okay, I'm not able to define this policy at this moment. But this is what you have for uh, password on the authentication strength. So you can pre-create this and force users to use those levels or probably various options of authentication as the case may be. If you have questions, you could drop them in the chat. So next that we have to talk about is hybrid identity. But I can see because of the glitch we had earlier, we actually running out of time, and uh, I don't want this session to run for too long. So if you have questions, let's take this time to attend to questions. If you have questions, let's take them. You can drop your questions in the chat. Okay, so someone is saying, is Windows Hello network dependent? So Windows Hello is not network dependent. So the way Windows Hello works is that you have a secret identity, or probably a token or a pin. It's actually called a pin, which is tied to your device. And that pin is also tied to the user who is logging into that particular device. So, and the idea is that the difference between a pin and a password is that a password can be reused across several platforms. So let's say I am within my Azure Active Directory, or probably my on-premise Active Directory. I have a username and a password. Because of the way this works, that username and password is works with the single sign-on or probably multiple use kind of technology. So, which means that if I'm logged into this device here using that username and password, I could go to another device that is joined to the domain, that is trusted on the domain. I could sign using the same username and password, and the same thing applies to application. So, which means if I suffer password theft, whoever is logging in does not need my device to be able to access resources. All they need to do is to get another device, go to the browser, sign in to access the resource, or probably log into another device, and they are done. But however, for a PIN, and that is even though users try to they find it difficult to understand that Windows Hello is a form of multi-factor authentication. And what are the factors? You have your PIN and you have your device. If you have the PIN and you don't have the device, you can't log in. It is not dependent on your network, because even when you're not connected to the network, you can still log into your device using that particular PIN. But even when an attacker knows your PIN, they must have access to your device. If they have access to your device, then they must know your PIN. That makes it a combination of two factors for you to be able to complete authentication. But if it is a password based for domain joined devices, if it was a username and a password, all I need is your username and your password. I don't need your device. I can get another device that is on the network and log into it, and have access to your profile. I have access to your data and information. Uh, I hope that answers your question. So, uh, in simple terms, no, Windows Hello is not network dependent. It's only dependent on your device. Yes. So now, uh, Windows Hello makes use of several methods of authentication outside just the PIN. You could use PIN. You could use biometric, which is your fingerprint, and you could also use facial recognition for devices that support that. But even before you can use your facial recognition or use your fingerprint, you must have a PIN. So those other methods, which is your fingerprint and your facial recognition, are optional methods which you can use on top of your PIN. So what does that mean? Number one, I must have defined my PIN on my device. But when I need to log in, because my device supports the use of facial recognition or probably thumbprint, I may choose not to use that, all I need to do is to use those what defines me or probably who I am. That is my thumbprint and my facial recognition. But before I can set that up, I must have defined my PIN. So it is just an option for authentication. It doesn't typically serve as a second factor authentication in this particular case, because your two-factor authentication is actually the PIN and your device. But on top of that, instead of using the PIN, it's an option for the PIN. So if I don't want to use the PIN, then I can use my fingerprint, then I can use my Windows Hello. But even when you go to another device, if you had not set up a PIN, on top of which you now had your fingerprint and your facial recognition, you still can't log into that device. So which means I can't just randomly pick a device and apply my fingerprint. I wouldn't be able to log in. So they are all tied to that particular device. I hope that answers your question. So if there are more questions, so in the next session, we would continue from the hybrid identity. We'd run these through to talk about how you can integrate Azure Active Directory with your on-premise infrastructure and even begin to enjoy some of those advanced security features that the cloud-based identity offers you over your on-premise. So what typically that means is that I have the scope and limit of my on-premise environment, but when I initiate an hybrid, I begin to enjoy the additional features that a cloud-based identity management system would offer me. So we look at what are those options and features of hybrid. Would try to set one up. So which means for you to be able to set up an hybrid identity environment, you must have an existing on-premise Active Directory environment. Try to set one up and how we perform identity synchronization, and we'll talk about some of those other features. Then we'll move on to talking about identity protection and role-based access control. So for additional reading, I'll drop that in the Discord channel. If you have questions, more questions, you can drop that in the Discord channel also. I'll try as much as possible to answer that. So let's enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend.